My guest today is Vennesa Van Ameyde. Vennesa serves as the Chief Operating Officer of Kasasa, an award-winning fintech and marketing services company that provides ongoing consulting services to more than 600 community financial institutions across the US. A senior operating executive, Vennesa has demonstrated talent for transforming and scaling organizations to foster rapid growth. And she's a people's champion who is passionate about creating a best place to work culture. With an undergrad from Vanderbilt University in political science and anthropology and a master's in diplomacy from Norwich University, Vennesa received Lean Six Sigma training from the University of Michigan College of Engineering. And she also studied theory of constraints for operations at the Goldratt Institute. She has been honored to receive recognition by the Austin Business Journal as a Profiles in Power and Women of Influence finalist in 2015. Vennesa believes that the only limitation that she has in life is she herself. Let's listen to how preparation, team success, and self-belief propelled Vanessa's career. Hi, Vennesa. Welcome to Atlanta Diaries, and thank you for taking out time to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just jump into the first question because I'm excited to share your journey. Vennesa, you said at some point when we spoke last time that being in the corporate world was never on the cards. Given that now you're a chief operating officer in an industry which is not such a traditional industry, love to talk about how did then that play out and share with us more about it.
Yeah, I always say I kind of accidentally found myself here. And, I didn't wake up as a little girl and say, hey, one day I want to be an executive or a COO. Actually, the only thing I ever wanted to do when I was a young adult and a child was to grow up and play soccer. And so, I spent a lot of my years early on trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life. I went to school at Vanderbilt and I graduated with a political science and anthropology degree. And I landed in a role that I just kind of took because I needed health insurance. And I quickly kind of realized a year and a half into it that I was going nowhere very fast. And that even though I had a lot of initiative and I wanted to try to create some value to the organization, I was one of thousands of people in an organization and they just didn't care what I did or didn't do. And so I said, hey, I want more for my life. I want to be able to contribute something. And at the time, I was very excited about the prospects of maybe traveling internationally or focusing on law. And so I went and got my master's degree in international diplomacy and conflict resolution. And I always joke that my degree is not super valuable and also very valuable at the same time with regards to what I'm doing today, because as you navigate meetings and discussions and different interests inside of an organization and with your investors, sometimes you do need a little diplomacy and how to, go through those conversations and influence outcomes. And so I didn't actually obviously end up in international politics or law or become an ambassador, but it was definitely a fun career journey to get here.
Superb. This is a great start to so many questions, Vennesa. I can't agree more on how much diplomacy we need to do in leadership. So soccer sounds really exciting and interesting, Vennesa. Let's talk a little bit about that. What kind of leadership lessons did you take from your journey as a soccer player?
I think one of the hardest lessons I ever learned was that I couldn't do it all by myself. You really just can't do it all yourself. You have to rely on the people on your team to be able to together create something bigger than any individual person. I was a pretty decent soccer player and I was the captain of my team. And I was naive enough back then to think that I could do anything and that, I could go help out the forwards, on offense, or I could go help out the defenders on defense. And what I learned was that if I was so busy trying to help them that I couldn't be where I needed to be in the center of that field when they needed me to be there, then it all kind of collapsed. And so in other words, I had to trust that they could be and they could do what they needed to do in their roles and that I was supposed to be where I was supposed to be able to contribute to the team. And that's hard when you're very strong at what you do and you have an A-type personality, or you want to do all the things yourself. And really, I think the strongest lessons, at least I learned from team sports, is that everybody has a role. And when everybody's playing their role to their highest capabilities, that's when the magic happens.
As a coach, I work with leaders at large. And I think that's the biggest struggle, to navigate the journey from being an individual contributor and being really good at that, from there to becoming a leader and becoming someone who's carrying people along. How did you then go through that journey of letting go? Did you go through that struggle, or did it come naturally to you?
I think anybody that says leadership comes naturally is kidding themselves. You do get better with time because you recognize what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully you take feedback along the way, constructive feedback, and you grow from that, and when I was making that transition myself in my 20s from being an individual contributor to being the leader of the team, I was very naive, and I really did think, hey, if I could just clone myself, I got this opportunity because they liked what they saw. And so I should just find more people that could do exactly what I was doing, exactly how I was doing it. And I quickly realized how entirely wrong that was, because as an individual, I am not great at everything. I have strengths and I have opportunities and areas that I need to grow. And I didn't want a bunch of mini-me's running around, because then we would be short-sighted. We wouldn't be able to look at the robustness of the solution, because people are going to come with different perspectives and different filters and different lenses. And we're going to all look at the same problem and see different challenges and see different opportunities on how to solve that. And so what I started to be able to do was recognize that everybody has a gift to the world. And my job as a coach was to assemble the greatest team that could go and then conquer that thing together. And I think a lot of people today actually get promoted from an individual contributor to a manager with no training and no mentorship from people in organizations. And they're just kind of thrown into being a people leader, and they're just like, hey, go figure it out. One of the things I've tried to do differently for the next generation of leaders in my organization is to provide mentorship, to provide leadership development, and doing some additional trainings. I've spent a lot of time teaching classes and teaching specific modules around what do you have to do differently when you're a leader versus an individual contributor, and making sure people are exposed to that so that they can really decide, hey, is this for me? A lot of people think that's the only path in an organization, is from a level 1 individual contributor to a 2, to a 3, and then to a manager, and then a director and a VP and so forth. But really, there's also a path to being an incredible subject matter expert in what you do and not being a people leader. And both of those paths exist, and they both have equal earning potential. And so you really have to get into leadership, people leadership, for the right reasons. If you don't enjoy coaching people, if you don't enjoy helping a team become the best that they can be, then you probably want to go on that other individual contributor route, because you're going to be really disappointed in the amount of coaching that you have to do. Because as a leader, it's not about what you do anymore. It's about what your team can do. It's about what the results you can get together. And I think that's the biggest misconception in leadership.
Yeah, I can relate to this at so many levels. That's really what set me into starting Atlanta Diaries, because, I often talk to women leaders, and through these conversations, sometimes it just comes out that I'm not made to be a leader. It's almost like they go backtrack and say, I'm happier being an individual contributor rather than going into leadership roles. So I want to talk a little bit more about Kasasa. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about the mission of Kasasa. Like, I read about the fact that, you empower community financial institutions. What does that mean? And were you intentional about even taking on Kasasa as an organization?
Yeah. So, Kasasa is a financial technology and marketing provider to community financial institutions. In all 50 states, we have over 3 million account holders in 3,400 branches, and we are a B2B2C organization. So, in other words, our mission is to help enable community financial institutions to be the go-to place for products and services and help them compete against the mega banks of the world. Because we really do believe that the decentralization of wealth outside of the top 4 megas, outside of Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Chase and B of A, is actually better because there's so many misconceptions about where your money is safe these days. And a lot of people think, their funds are safer at mega bank. And that's just simply not true, because what we know from history is that mega banks actually engage in riskier investments, whereas a community financial institution, they're working with consumers in smaller communities, and they're more careful with their investments because they're investing the dollars of the people that they see on the weekends that their kids go to school with. And so they really take a lot of pride and joy in taking care of their communities and giving back to local small businesses. And funding the majority of small business loans actually comes from small community banks and credit unions that we work with. And so that mission's near and dear to my heart, because I really do believe in local and the power of that and the power of communities. And so Kasasa takes it a step further and says, we want to be the company that puts love in banking. I've been at Kasasa for 15 years, and I've been in this seat for 6 years, and I've learned a lot of things over that time. But I think the number one thing that remains true is that our mission hasn't changed, our values haven't changed, and we are in this to help consumers and to help communities.
I could hear the passion in your voice, right? And I'm wondering the fact that HR is under your leadership. So is this intentional? Because I can imagine that a mission of this kind has to ensure that the team understands the values and the culture of the organization.
Yeah, a lot of people do ask, why is HR under the COO? And that's a common question that I get. And I think for us, it's about, how do you operationalize your mission? How do you operationalize your values? A lot of companies have those values inscribed on the wall, but at Kasasa, what we're trying to do is build it into our day-to-day. So number one, from a foundational perspective, is building a culture where we should be able to answer the question of, like, why should employees care, to be able to make our mission relevant. So in turn, they're helping their friends, their neighbors, the people with which they live and work and play. So having the right mission, and then hiring the right people and interviewing for culture fit and exiting the brilliant jerks. And so, one of my other roles as a COO is to have goal alignment, right? To create clear and transparent goals, because I do truly believe that people need to know what winning looks like. And they should understand as an individual, how is what they're working on contribute to the corporate goals. And so having that alignment, having regular performance conversations, development discussions, because it's not just, hey, did you meet or exceed performance? It's also, is the company doing right by the individuals and developing them and having career development check-ins and discussions and offering them career paths as well. And then, of course, a huge part of culture is to making sure that you create opportunities for employees to engage with each other and build relationships. And that's really hard to do in a remote first organization, but we've found a way to do it. And, to make sure that people have those opportunities. We actually have small groups. We call them patch groups. Our patch is our set of values as an organization. And on a bi-monthly basis, they actually meet. Sometimes they do fun things like scavenger hunts, and sometimes they do company goals and stretches and things like that. But there's always this, how do we build this culture, this community of people? And how do you create this puzzle that kind of all works together beautifully? As a COO, I'm always interested in ongoing improvements, whether I'm working in a kind of production or any kind of KPIs, but it's also true for how is the organization supporting our employees. We call them Spartans. And, and so we do employee surveys, we do leadership surveys to gather feedback and then take that into consideration as we're planning our next quarterly and annual goals around people development. So for me, it's a lot about also celebrating victories and sharing our wins with each other and recognizing people's hard work. And I think that's the magic sauce that we've been able to create at Kasasa. That's one of the reasons why we've been a best place to work for year after year in Austin as well.
Thank you, Vennesa. This topic, which is very close to my heart. So I was so glad you've shared so much. So is Kasasa purely remote, or do you have in-person work as well?
We describe ourselves as a remote first organization, meaning we do have a corporate headquarters in Austin. And there are times where we ask people to come in for specific meetings, whether it's an all hands event or just team meetings, especially if you're on a client success or a sales team. We are very regularly having trainings and meetings like that here in the office. But outside of the facilities office management team, the IT team, and the executive team, 95% of our organization works remotely. We're constantly in Zoom meetings. We have daily huddles. We do a lot of things to create community, and we don't rely on face-to-face interaction. We love seeing each other and we welcome that opportunity, and it kind of augments the times where we have to be in Zoom meeting after meeting and day after day. But I think primarily we've been pretty successful. We used to actually be 100% in-person organization prior to COVID. And then when we made that transition, it actually allowed people to move out of Austin. And it was exciting to be able to see people take that opportunity to elevate their personal relationships and their families and create that experience for their lives that they couldn't have if they were close or required to be tethered to an office. And for us, it's about really trusting our employees, our Spartans, to care about the company as much as we do. And we found if you give them that autonomy and you trust them, they repay that in kind. So it's not about logging hours. We don't care about the level of effort and the number of hours people work a week. I care about the results. Are we meeting our missions? Are we accomplishing our goals? And if that takes you 35 hours a week or 45 hours a week, I really want to give that flexibility and autonomy to everybody out there.
I want to sort of backtrack a little bit now and love to talk about how your early years shaped your journey and what was your mantra as you started your journey.
I didn't have the easiest upbringings in childhood. And I would say that, I even experienced some personal trauma that I don't really want to dive into today. But what I will say is that I had an opportunity when I was young to decide for myself if I wanted to look forward or if I wanted to look backwards. And for me, I just wanted my eyes on the horizon. I wanted to be able to break the cycle of poverty and overcome any of my past trauma. And I needed to unshackle myself mentally from some of the things that I experienced. And it led me down a path of, at first, a little bit of anger towards the world of like, why am I in this situation? Why me? And it's very tempting to stay in a place like that. And a lot of people do actually, because it can be really overwhelming to have gone through some experiences, not to diminish any personal traumas people have had, but I made that personal decision that, again, I was going to look forward. And so I set off on a journey to be as educated as I could be, to have as many experiences as I could. And I didn't know if I'd be taken seriously in the world. I was very afraid that because I didn't come from the right pedigree or the right family experience, the right side of the tracks, or that I even had crooked teeth because I couldn't afford to get braces, that I would be dismissed. I really wanted to be a strong person. And I think that for me, strength meant being able to overcome those obstacles and finding a way to empower myself, whether that was through education or training. As I was moving in the organization and taking on additional scopes and responsibilities, I knew that I was leaning out over my skis. And rather than waiting for something to implode, I went out and sought additional educational opportunities. So what you don't see in my resume is a formal certificate. What you would find out if someone asked me about it is that I went and took several different courses, several different exec educational programs to be able to make sure that I had the additional skill set that I needed to be successful in specific roles. And there's many times I was in a room where I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I was sitting around table upon table with these very strong, very capable, very smart, perfectly pedigreed individuals. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to be worthy of sitting at this table. And so what that instilled in me was do more homework than anybody else. Don't just be prepared to answer the first question and anticipate the first question. You be ready to go 5 layers deep. And so for me, it was a ginormous game of chess in my own head of well, if they ask me about X, I'm going to be ready for X plus 5, but they could ask me about Y or Z, and I'm going to do that layer of due diligence going into those meetings and that preparedness. And I think that also created and instilled in the teams that I was a part of that they needed to also be a student of their business, to know what was expected of them. And I never set out to ever get promoted. I never actually set out to say, hey, I want to lead this team and ask for the responsibility or increase in scope. What I did do, however, was make it a point to always try to put the team's success above myself. I would ask myself, hey, what do I need to provide in order to make my boss successful or the company successful or my team successful? And I did those things. And as a result of that, then I kept getting more and more additional opportunities to stretch and to grow. And I'll always be grateful for that. But when I think and I look back at, what started my journey, it really goes back to the only limitation that I have in my life is me. And so if I'm willing to do the work, if I'm willing to do the homework, if I'm willing to work hard, or in my case, I felt like I needed to work harder than anybody else, then the truth would set me free and I'd have those opportunities and I'd be able to break free from the things in my past. And I don't want to say mission accomplished because I don't feel like I've arrived yet. I don't feel like I'm done. And I have so many more things that I want to be able to accomplish in this world. But I do look back and I am proud that I've been able to provide a better life for my daughter, even when I could have imagined when I was a young child growing up and experiencing those things.
Thank you for sharing this. I really appreciate it. And I think it's going to inspire a lot of youngsters. You spoke about knowing your worth, right? So, how did you then traverse the journey of asserting yourself or making your voice heard?
So I would say those are, in my mind, two different things. I think being able to assert myself came earlier on because of the circumstances that I had to lived in. And I knew that I had to be able to protect myself and to be able to be my own voice and my own advocate. Knowing my worth, though, was a lot harder to figure out and to eventually lean into, because for the longest time I just felt lucky enough to be in the room, lucky enough to be at college, lucky enough to have those opportunities. It wasn't until much later that I actually learned that I earned those because of the success that I had, because of the preparation, because of the hard work. There were some really early on experiences that shaped me in corporate America. For example, I was getting to get my first promotion leading another team, and they were very similar teams. There was a team that I was leading, and it had one focus, but it was very similar to, let's call it a sister team. And they had a very similar operation, but they had a different focus. And I was asked to lead both teams. And I was so excited about this opportunity. And I was like, man, the company finally knows that I can do things and that I can provide this value. And I learned that I was being promoted into this role for less salary than what the individual was that I was being promoted over. So the combination of those two teams, I was about 30% under what that individual was making from a compensation perspective. And it stung. It was really hard because I was like, I'm 3 times better at my role from a metric perspective, not my personal opinion, but just objectively looking at a spreadsheet and saying, what are the outcomes that I've been able to accomplish? And they wanted me to go do this other role. And I did, and I leaned into it. And, and I had the conversation with my then manager, who is no longer a part of the organization. And they acknowledged and said, hey, I understand you're undercompensated, and we'll try to make this right over a period of a few years. And to me, my initial reaction was, okay, well, thank you for the opportunity. And then I went back and I'm an introvert, so I took a while to process that. And I said, no, that's not right. But I went back to my mantra again, if it's going to be, it's up to me. Then I wanted to go figure out a way to prove that value. So I made it my mission to say, I'm going to operationalize, I'm going to improve both of these collective teams so much that there's going to be indisputable evidence of the value that I'm creating. And so it really became about, how do I sell that? So accomplish the goal first, make sure I'm measuring the before and after so that I can translate that to the financial impact that I'm making, either in terms of additional revenue or additional margins and less expense going out, and being able to have the conversation and advocate for myself after I achieve those results to say, this is what I accomplished and I deserve to be compensated fairly for that. And I think that those are hard conversations to have, actually. Like, it didn't come naturally. I was nervous as all get out to be able to do that. But I knew that the data, again, would set me free, that they either would see my worth or my value based on that, or they wouldn't. And I would need to make a different decision about where to invest my time and energy in a different organization. And luckily, that was not the case. Luckily, that they did see that and say, absolutely. And they adjusted those things. And this is a very, very long time ago in my career. And I think it was very informative for me. Of some people always think that people will just give you what you deserve because you've earned it. And my experience has been, that's not the case, that you never actually have to stop advocating for yourself. And you always need to be able to know your value, know your worth, and be able to consistently share that story. But I think one of the nuances is that when you share that story, you're not doing it from a place of being braggadocious. You're not saying, hey, boastful, look at me. You're saying, hey, look at the value I'm providing the organization. And together, the team and I have been able to accomplish. And so when I'm going out and having those conversations and I'm managing up and across and providing that advocacy, I'm not just doing it on my behalf. I'm taking everybody up that ladder of success with me. And there's been a lot of people over the years that I have been able to highlight and create a spotlight for, and to create additional opportunities, additional promotions, additional scope, additional compensation for them as well. And so they know it's a team effort. There's zero times where it was about, here's where I was framing those arguments about me. It was all about, this is what the team did, and this is what that we were able to do for the organization. And I think doing it in that way helped maybe lower some barriers, because they didn't see it as a one-on-one confrontation. It was a, hey, how do we recognize this as an organization? And it was a different approach, and I think a successful one.
You were like a cheerleader for the whole tribe. That's amazing. Vanessa, looks like when you went through that very, very difficult situation, you were intentional about fixing it, right? You wanted to solve for it. So I'm just wondering, who was your go-to person? Were you like sort of your own cheerleader, or, were there mentors in your journey? And because I think it takes a lot of mental strength to see these situations as an opportunity.
I would love to be able to look back and say that I had people looking out for me in the organization, but I don't actually think that that's the case. I don't feel like I was ever on the receiving end of one-on-one mentorship and development, or someone that would say, hey, you're being undercompensated, or you're being undervalued, or here's how you craft this argument, here's how you advocate for yourself. What I will say, because I didn't have that, the result of that is that I feel inclined to do that for everybody else. And so it has shaped me as a leader. And what I will say is that, my current boss is wonderful, and he's very supportive, and he's a mentor that I wish that I would have always had my entire career. But I've only very had that exposure recently. And, very much after I had already climbed my way through those trenches. And if other women looked out for other women, or other women looked out for other men, or other men looked out for other women, I mean, regardless of gender or circumstance, like if people just looked out for each other and said, hey, how can I help us all be successful? It would be, it'd be a lot easier. And I think you could then focus on the work instead of focusing on some of those other things that occur in an organization. And I don't actually know, nor do I try to take credit for any of the mentoring or what I would consider kind of the blocking and tackling and the movement of obstacles from other people, because I do like being the magician behind the curtain. I don't try to ever assume credit or gain credit or visibility for the path that I try to carve for other folks, because they're earning those things on their own. All I'm doing is opening the door for them and trying to make it a little easier for them to get through that door than what I had going through my own experiences. And whether it's another woman on my team or outside of my team, I feel like my seat at the executive table, I have a responsibility to look out for all individuals, regardless of whether they're in my line of business or not, to be able to advocate for folks that might not have a voice on their own is something that's been very important to me to be able to do and pay forward. Because again, I didn't feel like I had that, and it might have made it a little easier along the way.
Wow. Looks like you took it on yourself to ensure that nobody else goes through what you went through. What were your joys as a leader?
I'm a very proud mama at work. And it's interesting because I try really hard to not look at work as being a family or the organization as being a family. My boss, the best mentor I've ever had, will say, hey, you can't fire your drunk uncle. Shows up at Thanksgiving and makes a mess of everything. And so we do try to not be family. We try to say, hey, we're a high performing team that has family values. And also, the other part of the reality is that there are people that have worked with me at 2 to 3 different companies, multiple states, and for many, many years. We're talking relationships that extend beyond a decade, and some even, maybe not as long. But one of the things I'm the most proud of is watching people have opportunities to improve themselves and create a career for themselves, and to be able to grow up. And I've watched people, get married and have kids that started off as an individual contributor and have moved into being a manager and to be a director and then a VP or an SVP. And it's really exciting to see that progression. And I want to be clear that I take none of the credit for those individuals. But what I will say is it's very awesome to watch them be able to reach their career goals and say, okay, well, there was a part of the cheering that went on from the sidelines that might have been encouraging to them along the way. And they earned all their accomplishments on their own because they put in the hard work, they put in the effort, and it is beautiful. That's probably one of my best legacy things, is to be able to look and see the team that I've created and go, wow, they amaze me every single day. I could not be here tomorrow and the company would be fine. They are the world's best team, the world's best leaders, and they're so badass and they're so incredible. And they truly care about what they do, and they care about each other. And that's enough to keep me going for the rest of my life and the rest of my career.
That's so beautiful. I saw one of your comments on LinkedIn where you said, I've always said emails is the root of all evil. And given that it's a remote first organization, I was very intrigued by that comment and love some context and perspective on this. And I can see where it's coming from, but I was wondering, is there any anecdote, or tell us more about it?
I do loathe email. So I do think that quote is accurate. I kind of feel like emails where ideas go to die. There's a time and a place for email. If an email needs to be there to recap a conversation or to make sure that you're aligning folks, or because you need to send a document to be reviewed, that's okay. But my general rule of thumb for email is like, if it takes you more than 30 seconds to read that email, that should be a meeting. That should be a conversation, because I get a few hundred emails a day. And if it's really that important and someone needs a conversation, then they're going to reach out via Slack or text or stop by, virtual Zoom or an office. And you just get so much more business done, I think, personally. And I'm not saying it has to be face-to-face, because again, our organization is 98% remote. But being able to ask the next level questions, right? Email is so one-sided. It's so transactional. It's all about me putting something out there and then someone having to respond, and then I have to respond to that. And then this chain just goes on and on and on, versus like, if I could just have a dialogue with someone, then you get to do that. It's so much more effective and efficient to have that and to be able to solve problems. And so if you want to have a conversation, pick up the phone or turn on Zoom and call someone. That's my personal philosophy.
I love that. But the flip of it is that a lot of people say that meetings are time wasters. So, how do you strike that balance? And how would you speak to somebody of that kind who prefers to just send an email out rather than waste time having an interaction?
I think that someone's that doing that, they're making it about them. You know, when you make the time to have a dialogue and exchange, you're making it about each other and you're really focused on how do you create a mutually beneficial outcome versus, hey, I'm getting something off of my plate and giving that to you to go do. And when I think about what people need to be able to accomplish every day, you vote your priorities with your calendar. So for me, the people on my team, the people in this organization are the most important priority, because if I can set them up for success, then the company's objectives will take care of themselves. If I can coach them and help them in their day-to-day, everything else falls into place. So I have like one-on-one Tuesdays, for example, where I blitz and do all of my direct reports, one-on-ones. We do 30 minutes. And then I also do quarterly roundtables with my teams where it's a skip level roundtable. So meaning like I'm talking to the people that report into my VPs or SVPs. And we're all on a Zoom call together and I don't set an agenda and I'm literally just asking them, how can I support you? What's going on in your world? What's going well? What's not going well? And then we're building a relationship. We're talking to each other. And when you look at my calendar, actually, most of the time that I spend is related to people. It's talking to people, it's understanding that. And if you develop that regular cadence, all of a sudden, you don't end up having to have, back in the old days, it would be drive-bys, right? It'd be someone driving by your desk or walking by your desk and stopping. And so what you end up doing is saying, oh, okay, I know that I'm going to meet with this person in 2 days. So I'm going to create a list of things that I'm going to talk about. And so you can become more efficient in that time, like more intentional about that time that you spend together. And then I would also say that you then reserve the time for the ad hoc things that come up. So I also do daily stand-ups, like Scrum style, where, you know, my direct reports and I, we meet for 30 minutes every day, but most of the time it doesn't actually take 30 minutes. It's 15 minutes. It's a lightweight check-in. We come on Zoom and we talk about what we have going on for the day. These are my blockers. These are the things I need help with. And it's not a one-way communication from me to the team. It's really about the team communicating with each other. Then the rest of my calendar is reserved for strategic initiative. What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? Do we need to meet and align cross-functional teams? And then I can really focus on actually getting the work done and defining those things and actually doing work versus being in wasteful meetings. Because I agree, there's nothing else worse than email than being in a meeting that's wasting everybody's time. And so the most effective way that you can run a meeting is setting an agenda and then starting the meeting with what are the outcomes that we need out of this meeting? What are we driving to? And you set that up front. And then you make sure after the course of the meeting that everybody know what the key takeaways are. Does everybody have next steps? And did we accomplish what we set out to do? Checking that off and holding ourselves accountable. And I find that that's a much more effective way for me to manage my time, to be focused on the people that I serve, the teams that I support, and then the strategic initiatives that we have to accomplish. And then hopefully every now and then I get to squeeze in some personal development time on the nights and weekends and during a commute. But that's, at least for me, vote your calendar with your priorities.
That makes complete sense. Shifting gears a little bit, Vanessa, what do you think of vulnerability as a skill? And have you been able to bring any vulnerability in your leadership journey?
Vulnerability, I think, is the hardest thing to master. At least it was for me. I'm an introvert. I've had some really rough experiences in life. And so my natural tendency, especially very early on, was to protect myself and to wall myself off from other individuals. I had a very few, but very close friends and also colleagues. But what that created was, from the outside looking in, Vanessa's not accessible. She's not approachable. And people elsewhere in the organization actually wanted to get closer, to have access, to steal the line from Hamilton, to be in the room where it happens. And so you can't let people in if you are not willing to be vulnerable. And that was a lesson that I learned over a period of several years, that the more human I became, the more it allowed other people to also be human. And at the end of the day, we're not robots. We are people, and we all have hopes, fears, dreams, and we all actually show up every day and we care about what we're doing and we try really hard to do great things. And being vulnerable to me means being your authentic self and being willing to talk about what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, and being able to ask for help if you need it, and being willing to admit when you've made mistakes, and being willing to say, hey, I can't do this by myself. I need some help. And that's hard, because as a leader, you think you have to be a superhero. You have to go out and do all the things by yourself. And, you have to be perfect. And the reality is that you're never going to be perfect. And if you're going to always chase that perfection, you are always going to fall short. And then you're going to feel bad about yourself. And that's going to create an emotional cycle that you don't want to be in. One of the best mentors that I ever had, said progress, not perfection. And what he meant by that was, don't let perfect get in the way of progress. And as long as you're continuously improving yourself, your team, your organization, that's okay. And if people can see you knowing that you're working on yourself, it gives them the permission to work on themselves as well. And then it invites the conversation of, how can I help you? How can you help me work on ourselves together? And then all of a sudden, you're in this together versus being isolated on your own. And growth doesn't happen in isolation. Nothing happens in isolation. For vulnerability, if you can conquer that and you can put yourself out there, it means that all of a sudden you're going to create a community, and that together can do amazing things.
I love that whole community perspective. What was the turning point when you started this journey of showing vulnerability and validated in your head that I'm doing the right thing now, or I'm glad I've started becoming vulnerable?
I think early on, especially in my 20s and early 30s, I was an operations leader. So I was only focused on results. I was only focused on KPIs and delivering those things. And what I got was short-term results, but not long-term results. And it was also not enjoyable. It wasn't a fun experience, for me or for the people that I was working with. And I realized, there has to be a better way. And so for anybody out there that might have encountered me early in my 20s or in my early 30s, I'm sorry. Like, that's definitely not who I am today, and I feel like the ultimate lesson that I learned is that people need emotional leadership from you. They don't just need business leadership from you. Yes, of course, they need to understand what their goals are, and they need to understand how what they do fits into the bigger picture. And hopefully you can inspire them to be accountable to achieving those results versus you just holding them accountable. That is a completely different thing. But along the way, recognizing that people, again, are human, and that you can create a beautiful partnership if you're focused on making each other successful and making the team and the company successful as your most important priority. I think that was just the hardest lesson for me, was to recognize, to be vulnerable, to share my feelings, to share the love that I truly do have for everybody, but I'm always going 1,000 miles an hour, and always have too many priorities on my plate. I even remember in the old days when everybody was in the office, you'd walk down the hallway and I'd always be the person on my phone. Not because I was avoiding eye contact, but because I was legitimately walking to the bathroom, trying to answer emails and Slacks and doing all those things and just keeping up with work. But what that created was zero relationships with people. And when you make time for people, they make time for you. And developing those relationships is something that I've worked really, really hard at over the years, and that I do feel like I'm much better at. And I've allowed people to kind of be part of my life in a way that early on, like I said, I was scared to have those relationships because I was afraid of being hurt or experiencing that same kind of trauma that I had when I was growing up. And so truly letting that go and saying, this is a different way of being and living and experiencing life. It's much more fulfilling and joyful to do it like this with people versus doing it on your own.
Beautiful. On a lighter note, What's a fun fact about Vanessa that your team also doesn't know about?
I'm pretty open with my team now. I don't know that they don't know much things about me now, but I would say that my daughter is my light and joy, and she's just turned 18 and she's headed off to NYU in the fall, and I'm so proud of her and so excited for her next chapter of her life and her journey, and being able to have great moments with her and to be able to do and have experiences with her is something that I do treasure. And so even last week we went skydiving, and the month before that we were swimming with sharks without cages. And it goes back to like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to just lean into this, even if it's a little scary, because I am terrified of heights. I am terrified of sharks. I am terrified of all these things. And my daughter just loves anything that scares her or creates that adrenaline rush, right? And if left to my own devices, I would never go skydiving. I was terrified. And finding the path and the courage through those moments where you're not sure that you can do something, but you do it anyways, I think that's really exciting. And to be able to share those moments with my daughter and see her leaning into those opportunities, I'm excited about that. And I want to see where that takes her. And hopefully I can continue to be a part of that experience and journey with her.
With the wisdom of hindsight, what then will you tell your daughter as she goes into NYU or your younger self?
You don't have to do it alone, and nor should you do it alone. That life is so much better to do with people and finding your tribe and being your authentic self. Being and experiencing the only woman or the only Latina in a lot of different rooms over the years, it can be uncomfortable, and also it can be a wonderful opportunity, because I wanted to always be at the table for the right reasons, not because they reserved a chair for a woman, but because I was the strongest person, the most equipped person to do the work. And I would just say to my younger self, and even to my daughter, to trust that you are that right person, to believe in yourself, recognize that you are doing the thing and you're really good at the thing, and that you wouldn't be there if people didn't see and believe that in you as well. And I think I could have had a lot less angst and a lot more fun along the way had I just taken the moment and the opportunity to smile, laugh, and be in the moment versus always planning for the next moment. And I hope to be able to give that little bit of wisdom to my daughter, or if time machines were a thing, to my younger self.
Vanessa, before we end the session, which has been really inspiring, and I want to really acknowledge that, when I coach women leaders, many women I've coached feel that they've had bosses who don't watch out for them. Those bosses probably think it's a rite of passage, that because they've gone through it, the others should go through it too. Any perspective, any anecdotes on how would you explain this, or if you experience anything like this?
I've definitely had other female leaders who felt like, hey, they had to go through the hardships, the challenges, and it's just the rite of passage, exactly how you stated it. And I obviously went through those, but there has to be a better way. I was so inspired by Michelle Obama years ago. I was at a conference that I attended and she was speaking. It was a room of like 10,000 people. But in the moment, I felt like she was speaking right to me. And she said, it's not enough for you to walk through the door of success. You have to reach behind you and help other people through that door with you and offer them that support and that help. And if more people did that, instead of looked at each other as competition, or instead of looking at each other as a threat or, again, rite of passage, then I wonder if things like the gender gap, the wage gap would be closed faster and sooner. If we could, as a community, help each other, then I think we could do greater things faster and close those gaps sooner. If anything else, those leaders that I experienced that did that, they inspired me to never do that. They inspired me to do the exact opposite, which was to be the person that advocated for other women, to be the person that could help grease the wheels or pave the way or open doors or provide coaching and mentorship, to provide allyship, because it's not about you. It's about creating a better world for all of us and for our children. And I look at my daughter with such hope and such optimism that she's going to be able to go contribute great things into the world. And I hope the women in her life help her the same way that I would want other people to, help her, and to hope that they would see that as an opportunity rather than a threat. And I'm inspired by that. I do it because it's the right thing to do. And you can do that one human, one person, one woman at a time.
You're sharing all this in Atlanta Diaries because you're aligned to the same mission, Vennesa. So thank you again for this. And before we end the conversation, like you're aware that Atlanta Diaries is the place where we're helping such women leaders learn and unlearn their definitions of success. So what are your parting thoughts as they transition into larger roles?
I would say lean into it. It's really interesting to me that there's a group of individuals and personalities in the world that say, hey, I have to be 100% perfect or ready for the next opportunity before I ever even raise my hand. And then there's another group of people and personalities that say, hey, I've only got 50% of the resume or the pedigree or the experiences, or maybe it's 60%, but I'm going to make the rest up with tenacity and grit and a willingness to show up and put in the work and to, close the gap with additional training and education and lean into it and learn along the way. And I would encourage people to do the latter. You're never going to be ready. You're always going to feel like there's still more to do and there's still more to learn and there's still more to accomplish. And if you wait, that opportunity is going to pass you by. So the only thing that you can do is actually jump that chasm now and say, hey, there's got to be a way, and I'll figure it out. And hopefully I'll be able to lock arms with other women that can help support me and that I can lean into my network versus trying to do it on my own. Because when you do things on your own and when you're at that 50% or that 60%, then fear can drive you instead of saying, here's the opportunity, here's what I want in my life, and here's what I could go do if I just trusted myself. If I trusted what I bring to the table and believed in myself half as much as everybody else believed in me, I wouldn't have that doubt. And if you can overcome that, and it's hard to do it again by yourself. So lean into the women in your life, lean into other people in your life to give you that extra strength that in those moments you may not feel like you have, but you have it. And you just have to look up and see it.
Thank you for being a part of Atlanta Diaries.
It's been an honor to be here and to spend this time with you. So thank you for having me as well.
Thank you for being a part of this incredible journey with Atlanta Diaries. I have had the privilege of hosting guests who courageously shared their most vulnerable selves with me. And even if only a small segment of these conversations can champion the journey of one person, it will be worth each and every moment. And together, we know we can create an even greater impact. So I do have a humble request for you. If you found value in these episodes, please consider sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and on your social media. I would also love to hear your thoughts and will really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review or rating. See you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.